really thrilled to be here. I've had these months of work with 18 of your stellar leaders, courageous, brilliant leaders. So impressed. I have a relationship with this church since the Austin Ford days, when I visited, when Austin and I and some other people, that I was a Baptist then, were members of the abolition of the death penalty movement in Georgia. And I went and visited him in jail because he acted out in the Georgia State Senate in the gallery, and they put him in jail. And so I drove from Macon and visited him because Jesus said, you know, you came and visited me in prison. So, but I've had relationships with every other rector, including the Senate. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm unloading all over the place because the last time I was here was in this room when it was the worship space. Y'all come on in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that worship space you're in, oh my gosh, it's got so many holy architectural moments and artistic moments throughout it. I really love it. But enough about that. I'm taken with how the phrases Church-ianity versus Christianity are entering into our common parlance. And they've been around for a while, and I'll tell you a little bit about their history, but they made a huge introduction into our life at Lambeth, when our own presiding bishop, Michael Curry, ended a presentation, and by the way, these PowerPoint slides are going to be in the hands of Virginia after I do a little editing. So I characteristically do this. There's so much more than you can appropriate right now, but I'll just point out 2 or 3 things. Anyway, he was making a point about Jesus and being followers of Jesus in community. And he wound up by saying, you have got to be in community, but that's not enough. We don't want to just make more churchians. We want to make Christians people who work and act and live and love like Jesus. Now, this is not original to our presiding bishop. Although Walter Brueggemann didn't talk about Church-ianity and Christianity, he wrote this thin volume on the Psalms, which has really helped me understand the Psalms, particularly the Psalms that turned me off. And he said that all the Psalms can be understood as Psalms of either orientation or disorientation or reorientation, which goes with, is resonant with, we won't do that yet. We'll see Richard Rohr in just a minute. Richard Rohr's business about life and theology and church and religion are about order, disorder, and reorder. And the whole notion is that I think the church right now is between disorientation and reorientation for a lot of different reasons, including COVID. And all of us, I think, are reconstructing Christianity and church, and how can we be faithful people. So I want to throw in now a non-theologian, a guy I think is a national treasure. He's a philosopher, really bright guy named Charles Eisenstein. And he says that we are between the old story and the new narrative. We're exiting an old story that explained to us the way of the world and our place in it. Some may cling to it all the more desperately as it dissolves. We are a society, and that right there, my friends, is a window into the political polarization of this country right now. People who are really clinging to the old way as just desperately as it's dissolving in front of their eyes, and that's why they're so damn scared. We as a society are entering a space between stories in which everything that had seemed so real, true, right, and permanent comes into doubt. Now, we won't get to the slide. We won't have time to get to the slide that's in this big PowerPoint about Charles Eisenstein being the first person who introduced to me the phrase, the myth of the separate self. He says that that's just a cancer in American life and also in religion, is that we think that we can be separate selves when everything in science is telling us absolutely the opposite. We are interconnected wholes. So I'm just setting it up before I get into the content. Then here is one of my mentors. Her name is Dr. Valerie Batts, and she instituted an organization called Visions Incorporated. And it is the model for dismantling racism that I have been a student of for 25 years now. Started when I was the rector at All Saints Church in Pasadena. And it is her model that I have been using as I have been a consultant with the St. Bartholomew's Steering Committee on Dismantling Racism. And I just wanted to say that sprinkled through this, and she's not a kind of a Church-ianity, Christianity person, although she, interestingly enough, is a cradle Episcopalian. And her father was the principal of the high school in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And one of their rectors, I don't think it was called a rector, was Jack Spong, for anybody who knows the district. So she's very Episcopalian in my mind without being traditionally Episcopalian. Nevertheless, here are her values. Identify previously unconscious biases and misinformation in yourself, in others, and in organizations. Now you can already see the disorientation and destruction in that, right? You're taking your unconscious biases and making them aware. You communicate more effectively across difference, recognize personal, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural barriers to inclusion. There are 4 levels in every transaction in her thinking. And I mentioned that in my sermon when I gave my illustrations at the end of my sermon about the interpersonal and then the institutional, political, and cultural. We understand, envisions the ongoing personal effects of historical and contemporary exclusion and oppression, for example, the effects of sexism on both men and women, and facilitate change in groups and organizations to create a supportive environment of inclusion, and that's what has been going on, I think, in this church for a long time. A supportive environment of inclusion. Now, to Richard Rohr, who many people here love, some of his great books. He calls himself an alternative orthodoxy person, but he's the first person who I read about Church-ianity and Christianity. And his general critique is that faith too frequently has been presented as a system of beliefs rather than as a loving way of life. The doctrine and dogma that you would kill over versus the experience of being a Jesus person. For centuries, Christianity has been presented as a system of beliefs that has supported a wide range of unintended consequences, from colonialism to environmental destruction, subordination of women, to stigmatization of LGBTQ people, anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, clergy pedophilia to white privilege. What would it mean for Christians to rediscover their faith not as a problematic system of beliefs, but as a just and generous way of life, rooted in contemplation and expressed in compassion, that makes amends for its mistakes and is dedicated to beloved community for all? Could Christians migrate? Here's the disorientation to the reorientation. Could Christians migrate from defining their faith as a system of beliefs to expressing it as a loving way of life? So that's what we're here to talk about this morning. So this is a little chart I made as a result of reading one of my favorite books by him, Things Hidden. And what he says is, and I'm calling it courtroom theology versus banquet theology, and you'll hear about what that's about about in the sermon in just a few minutes. But on the left is what he calls stinking thinking. It's nitpicking, tit-for-tat thinking that is in religion, as opposed to thinking that's joy-based. It is a win-lose world, as opposed to God's win-win world. It's the win-lose world of rewards and punishment, as opposed to forgiveness or compassion. It has a legalistic paradigm versus a grace paradigm. I'd rather be right than in relationship, or I'd rather be in relationship than be right. Retributive justice versus restorative justice. Either or thinking as opposed to both and thinking. Superior punitive judgmental parent ego state versus the adult and nurturing parent ego state. The ego is the focus. Soul is the focus in the second. The false self, to use Mertonian words, versus the true self. God is out there or up there, the man upstairs, and is the enforcer, as opposed to God being within everybody and everywhere in the cosmos. And God is the lover, the merciful forgiver, and the compassionate one, and is the source of all being and becoming. Right? That's one way of looking at the alternatives between what has been, I think, deconstructed and what is being reconstructed. Now, there's another person who's doing some thinking on this, and her name is Elia Delio, and she is a Franciscan sister who has a PhD in pharmacology and worked on the ALS issue when she heard about Thomas Merton, went and got a book of his and stayed up all night reading it and was converted. So she left her being her identity primarily as being a scientist, and then became a historian of religion and a nun, and is doing some magnificent writing that's based on Teilhard de Chardin, who is really worth reading. And her importance to me is this Christianity we're moving toward, as opposed to Church-ianity, is a systems-oriented way of thinking, as opposed to an individualistic way of thinking, where we can separate ourselves. One of the most important words for her is whole, W-H-O-L-E. That Jesus was a whole maker. We are called to be a whole maker. And that all of us are wholes within wholes. That if you look at our body, there are all these things that are working together for the whole of the body, and that we are part of the whole system of creation. And Teilhard de Chardin calls this life that is in all of us love energy. We're accustomed to thinking about love as a human sentiment or emotion, but Teilhard saw love as passionate force at the heart of the Big Bang universe. The fire that breathes life into matter and unifies elements. Center to center. Love, he wrote, is the physical structure of the universe. It's both the structure and also the animating dynamic energy that's making things become even more in evolution. Fascinating reading. I'm on the board of her center, so I'm always promoting her. So this is the language of Teilhard in a prayer. Instead of saying about creative energy of the cosmos, love that unites atoms and humans, that through convergence creates new possibilities. Fill human consciousness with divine grace. Creative love energy, infuse the divine milieu with energizing love, and bring all creation to the completion of Omega. That's an option for the kind of religious language we are moving toward, it seems to me, in our life. Oh, there it is. I think. Now, for my money, a lot of focus is rooted biblically in 1 John 4. I frequently say that I'm a 1 John 4 Christian. Now, I'm obviously, like all human beings, more complicated than that. The first chapter of John is very important to me, the first chapter of Colossians, the first chapter of Ephesians. But in 1 John 4, 3 essential foundational claims are made. The first is that God is love. More than anything you can say about the ultimate power in the world, in life, and in history, the power many of us call God, more than anything you can say about that power. God is that power, and it is the power of love. So you can address God as love, as does theology. That is to say that God is the energy of love. You're going to talk a lot about energy, because in the post-Einsteinian world, energy is much more important to understand the world than matter, because all matter is translatable into energy, and everything is energetic, and the universe is a vibrational universe. So God is a verb, not a noun, not a man upstairs, particularly a white-bearded grandfather man upstairs. God is movement, the movement of love. That's the first point of that. And then there are two other points. Second, complete love, whole-making love, perfect love overcomes fear. So here we see that the writer of this letter is saying that the opposite of love is not hate or anything else, although hate may be fear disguised, but the opposite of love is fear, and that love is more powerful than fear. You can always bet on love winning. It may take longer than you want, and it will win. And thirdly, this has foundational implications in how you treat other people. All other people. 1 John chapter 4 says that if you say you love God whom you have not seen, while abusing, hating, mistreating other people and creation whom you have seen, you're a liar. To love God is to love other people. Neighbor as yourself is yourself. You're not loving. Catherine is not another being as much as Catherine is me, and I am she, and, including people we don't like, who annoy us. Bye-bye. So God love and neighbor love are inextricably intertwined. I think that that's the Christianity that we are rebuilding, is 1 John 4. Now, if we're going to talk about love being in all people, we're going to have to talk about systemic racism. Now, you remember I talked about one or two of the people back being systems people, understanding that there's no such thing as individualistic people. We are all in a system. What I do has impact on you and vice versa. I have the ability with my words and actions to traumatize another person and vice versa. We know lots of people who are in the Church Alumni Association who have been traumatized by this old man-in-the-sky religion that is segregationist and supremacist. Robin DiAngelo, in a book called White Fragility, does a great job of talking about people who look at racism as an individual sin as opposed to a systemic thing in which we live in no matter what. White people in North America live in the social environment that protects and insulates them from race-based stress. If you can turn off thinking about race, it's probably because you live in white skin, and that's part of our privilege. And it's not the case with our siblings who live in skin of color in a racialized society. This insulated environment of racial protection builds white expectations for racial comfort. while at the same time lowering the ability to tolerate racial stress, leading to what I refer to as white fragility. Robin D'Angelo. So, if we who have this vision of the kingdom of God as being totally inclusive and also egalitarian, can understand that the cost of our standing for that is going to be stress, because people are going to resist because they are not exercising those muscles. When I was in Pasadena, we had a priest who married into our staff. He was a retired guy. And when it came time for him to do the final blessing, he blessed those you love, serve, and challenge. And he said, if I had come into this church as a younger priest, I would have understood the importance of challenge. Now, Ellie DeBacher, I like to talk about Dan Siegel, who was a great psychiatrist, and the 4 S's, how the 4 S's can cure all sorts of things, heal traumas. So his 4 S's are: people need to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And then I said, I think there should be a 5th one: stressed. Stretched. And I love it, not stressed. I love it. So that's what we're talking about, that we need to stretch. Now, here's another fan who talks about this discomfort stuff. And all of you know Brian Stevenson, a walking saint, founder of Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery. He says, we have to commit to doing things that are uncomfortable. I have looked for times when injustice ended, oppression ended, when people were comfortable. No, only where people are willing to become uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to position yourself in uncomfortable places, and you have to be a witness to uncomfortable truths in places and conversations where you are uncomfortable. And I think that the church simply needs to tell its members, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you're going to have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Because change doesn't happen without that. So let's flex those muscles. Let's make church a spiritual gymnasium where we can go and work out. And then, let's see what's coming up too early. So, much later in this, we won't get to it because we have to stop at 10:15 and I was question and answer time. You may have remembered Valerie Batts back earlier. She says that her whole process and model of moving from monoculturalism to multiculturalism, to go through that change process from the order, even a racist, sexist, misogynistic order, to an order where there's multiculturalism, inclusion, and egalitarianism, that's going to be uncomfortable, but the design is not to make it unsafe. Now that's a very interesting and attractive call to understand. That when I do something, I know the impact is going to be discomfort, that I'm really clear inside myself that I'm not here to make somebody unsafe. And if the situation is such, sometimes we can introduce something and back off and not push it, and then bring it back and back and back, and keep upping the ante on the discomfort, but never to make it safe. Now, here's some ways that some theologians are now talking about the new understanding. We've already looked at roar. But here's one. In our stained glass windows in the US and in Europe, we've got this non-historical, white-bearded, red-headed, white-skinned guy.
Blue eyes.
Pardon?
Blue eyes.
And blue eyes, thank you very much. And is usually receiving a white dove from his grandfatherly-looking man upstairs father. And that's how the Trinity is shown. But what has happened is we've had some archaeologists who have come up with what Jesus really might have looked like as a Middle Eastern man. And here at Jew. And here is some distinctions that are being made. White versus Middle Eastern brown skin, Christian versus Jewish. Now, we won't get into all of this. But Matthew Fox, who is the proponent of creation spirituality versus sin redemption theology, said he had a conversation with Edie Gazelle once. And Edie Gazelle says, I don't know what you Christians are thinking about this original sin. Jesus didn't believe in original sin. Jews don't believe in original sin. Well, Augustine in the 4th century actually introduced the notion of an original sin. So we have here a Jewish mind that believed in, if original anything, original blessing. Then patriotic versus colonized by Rome, justice through retribution, justice through restoration, we've already had those terms. Died for your sins versus killed by church and state. Sends sinners to hell as opposed to friend of sinners and outcasts. Silent in the face of oppression, liberates the oppressed, condemns sinners, critiques religious people, endorses church and state versus empire. A king versus a homeless man and a child refugee. Upholds the traditional family unit. This person had half siblings. Endorses holy war, and is totally nonviolent. That's just a start for some conversation. And we're going to have some in just a second. But here's this former Catholic priest, a Dominican, Matthew Fox. And he was, by Pope Benedict, was kicked out of the priesthood, Roman Catholicism, and was accepted by the Episcopal Church to be a priest. And he is Mr. Christian Spirituality. And for those of you who want a copy of this, I've put a link to his website. And he literally dives into this thing about the paradigm shift for our postmodern era, from fall redemption religion to Christian spirituality religion, which is what the way he called for it. And he has made a contrast chart on his website. And here's only a part of it. So in fall redemption spirituality, which he lays at the feet of Augustine, as opposed to Christian spirituality, which he lays at the feet of Celtic and Jesus religion, it begins with sin. Here, the lens begins with Dabhar, God's creative energy. Emphasize original sin, emphasize original blessing. Faith is thinking with assent, as opposed to faith is trust. Patriarchal versus feminist and gender balanced. Ascetic versus aesthetic. By the way, your worship space here is so aesthetically pleasing. I mean, you can look at all these moments and see all this architectural and artistic beauty. It's really wonderful. Then on and on. Mortification of the body, discipline toward birthing, control of passions, ecstasy, eros, celebration of passion. I'll see you there. 10:30, right? I'll be at 10:15, right? Virtue lies in the will. Virtue lies in the passions. Passion is a curse. Passion is blessing. God is Father. God is Mother. God is Child. God is as well as Father. Suffering is wages for sin, and suffering is birth pains of universe. All beings suffer. I think we'll stop there.